and also comes at a critical time when there are some insidious forces trying to erase history, say that there never was Solomon's Temple, there never was a Jewish presence, and every single day, as you're familiar, we're discovering more that confirms the Bible as well as a Jewish presence. Briefly on that.
Well, look, the facts speak for themselves. You know, as Senator Moynihan said, you can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. This is science. This was the work of secular archaeologists, well-recognized leaders in the field. They had no agenda. They discovered this ancient road, and the facts are the facts.
Where were the police? The question being asked by pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong, a day after demonstrators were beaten by masked thugs. Video of the attack has sparked an outcry.
You could tell how they were, if not colluding, almost cooperating with each other. How do you explain dozens of people were injured, some very seriously, and got taken to hospital, and the police didn't manage to arrest one person?
It's a terrorist attack on the people of Hong Kong, and they want to silence the people of Hong Kong.
Hong Kong convulsed in a new night of chaos, as the city seems to be spiraling further out of control. Protesters clad in black with faces covered again blocked roads and squared off with police.
The latest in a series of anti-government protests that have shaken Hong Kong for 2 months.
What started as anger over a contentious extradition bill backed by Beijing has now evolved into a bigger war over Hong Kong's freedoms and future.
An increasingly familiar sight in Hong Kong. Police clashing with protesters. This time in a district not far from the Chinese border, and coming after a largely peaceful march. A rally organized against merchants from mainland China who come to buy goods here in the district of Shangshui and then sell them on the other side of the border.
Today's Reclaim Shangshui protest follows the momentum of the anti-extradition law protests. Because there isn't an anti-extradition protest every day to keep us going, the enthusiasm from the public will decrease. I hope that through actions like this one, people in Hong Kong will not forget that there are actually many other social issues waiting to be resolved.
Saturday's relatively small protest came on the heels of several others that have drawn millions into the streets. A movement sparked by Hong Kong's now suspended extradition bill. The legislation would have allowed criminal suspects to be transferred to mainland China to face trial, but was put on hold last month after facing mass opposition. While Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has said the extradition bill is dead, many protesters say that's not enough. They want it scrapped for good, and they want Lam to resign.
The central business district. Following the peaceful march, some demonstrators threw petrol bombs at government buildings. Police responded with water cannon. There were also clashes between protesters and rival pro-Beijing supporters in the North Point and Fortress Hill neighborhoods. Protests have been taking place in the territory for over 3 months now.
We have our right to go to protest, to the streets, and we have to voice our demands to the government.
The movement was sparked by a proposed extradition bill, seen by many as the latest example of Beijing's growing reach over the territory. Governor Carrie Lam withdrew the planned legislation earlier this September, but the move was seen by many as too little too late. Protesters are now demanding political reform, universal suffrage, and an independent inquiry.
Hong Kong is in chaos. People are in the streets every weekend. Marches and rallies during the day become violent rampages at night. They wear masks. They barricade roads and destroy public property. They set fires in the street. They collect bricks from the sidewalk and throw them at the police. They make petrol bombs with glass bottles and throw them at the police and at government buildings. They break into and destroy the offices of government officials. And American flags can be seen in the streets. How did this happen? Why are protesters demanding U.S. sanctions on their own city? Let's unmask Hong Kong's anti-government movement and find out.
This has been Hong Kong's summer of discontent.
If we don't fight, there's no future for us.
Jimmy Lai was smuggled out of China at the age of 13 in a fishing boat. He's now one of Hong Kong's billionaire tycoons, supporting the protests with young people leading the way.
This movement is going to be persisting because it's a movement of martyrdom.
Hong Kong was a British colony for more than 150 years, ceded to the UK from China in the 1800s. It grew from fishing village to modern economic miracle, rich, respected, and full of Western institutions. Claudia Mo works in one of them, elected as a pro-democracy legislator.
Hong Kong people have managed to learn about universal values, human rights, democracy, rule of law. The writing has been on the wall. And the Hong Kong people just didn't realize or didn't pay enough attention to it.
More than a century and a half of British administration will come to an end.
The roots of this struggle date back to 1997, when the UK, in the person of Prince Charles, handed Hong Kong back to China. The UK and China agreed Hong Kong would be semi-autonomous, in charge of its internal affairs until the year 2047. That's when this city is set to revert to full Chinese rule. But for now, only Beijing has the power to appoint who runs for Hong Kong's chief executive, its top leader.
The power is not with the people in Hong Kong. The power lies in Beijing. That's her big brother, her big.
Was part of an organised crime group known as Triads, paid, they say, to assault campaigners against the extradition bill.
It shows men wearing white t-shirts, storming a train at the Yuen Long station and laying into anti-government protesters.
The politicians also accuse the police of cooperating with the attackers and for their slow response to cries for help.
Earlier today, we saw the city's fourth major protest in the past 6 weeks.
Police fired multiple barrages of tear gas canisters as they made the protesters give up ground. They once more surrounded government buildings and the police headquarters.
They say they keep hitting the streets because their freedoms are at risk.
Now to the massive protests erupting in Puerto Rico overnight, thousands of people taking to the streets, doubling down on their calls for the governor to resign.
Earlier today, hundreds of thousands on this island of 3.2 million filled the streets in the biggest demonstrations Puerto Rico has seen in decades. They are protesting government corruption.
Overnight, protesters and police facing off in Puerto Rico. Police using tear gas to disperse crowds after protesters gathered late into the night. The clashes following a day of massive demonstrations.
Protesters shut down a main highway that connects San Juan to the rest of the island. It appeared to be the largest demonstration yet, and the message was very clear. They won't stop until the governor steps down. There were thousands of demonstrators who faced off with riot police packing that narrow street right outside Governor Ricardo Rossello's mansion. A new report alleges a multi-billion-dollar corruption network is behind the chat group, where public funds were used to influence and benefit private clients and the Puerto Rico government. It claims the governor knew and did nothing to stop it. There were fireworks that went off behind the police barricade, and that's when police moved in using force, firing tear gas and pushing the crowd.
From the people who elected me democratically, today I feel that continuing in this position presents insurmountable difficulties. Having heard the complaints, spoken to my family, thought of my children, and in prayers, I've taken the following decision. I announce to you today that I'll be resigning as governor.
The resignation follows 12 days of historic and at times violent protests.
They're calling it a revolution. Others, like Heidi, say it's Puerto Rico's Arab Spring. But this was a transition also about a people who rose up and demanded more from their leaders on an island that's a U.S. territory.
Police in Paris have fired tear gas at protesters near the Champs-Élysées shortly after France's annual Bastille Day military parade. They detained more than 150 people, including 2 yellow vest protest leaders accused of staging an unauthorised demonstration.
French police fired tear gas, moving in on anti-government protesters in the capital.
Change tactics, as we need to do more than just stage weekly demonstrations.
The Yellow Vests' ranks have thinned from its peak late last year of 500,000 people. But widespread anger remains at the rising cost of living and the government's failure to offer economic relief. The protesters are calling for a national strike in early December and have vowed to step up the pressure.
Authorities had banned yellow vest demonstrations near the parade.
The screams of revolution here on the Champs-Élysées from the protesters, many of whom seem to have come here from that call from the Gilets Jaunes to protest on this Bastille Day, 230 years on from the French Revolution.
In nearby streets, some regrouped, turning violent, before police dispersed them with batons. Hours earlier, they whistled and booed President Emmanuel Macron.
The people of France, together with their leaders, were supposed to mark the storming of the Bastille, right? Who didn't read about this in grammar school, or at least in high school? I mean, this is the act that triggered the French Revolution. We all know about it. Instead, what happened in Paris this weekend looked at times like a new modern version of the Bastille storming, ironically enough. And yet the media, ironically enough, seems to be ignoring this story. So the people of France are obviously not happy with their government right now, and they are taking to the streets to show
palpable anger and tension on the streets, and we've seen clashes across Paris in this area around the Champs-Élysées throughout the Bastille.
Before watching over 4,000 military personnel in the parade, and a dramatic display of tech innovations, including drones and ground robots. Before an armed, futuristic flying soldier taking to the sky on a flyboard stole the show.
Suffice it to say that if the people of Venezuela, or any country that our government opposes right now, pick your country, we're having violent mass demonstrations, oh my God, right? Fox.
What we really wanted to talk about with you this morning is something of historic significance happening in Jerusalem today. In the city of David, there's a pilgrimage road, 2,000 years old. I had a chance to see it in my documentary for Fox Nation, Battle in the Holy City. Here's a preview of it, and then I want you to explain more about it.
I've never seen anything like this. I think this is the most exciting excavation in the world. I really do. This is it, by the way. You're on the road. This is the pilgrimage. This is the actual road as it was found. Wow. Can you believe it? How long is this tunnel? Where did we just enter? The road is 2,100 feet. It goes from the pool of Siloam in the south, where they would have cleansed, all the way into the temple in the north. Wow. Past the western wall into the temple, so you can walk. No road that was used 2,000 years ago. That's it.
Mr. Ambassador, explain the significance of the pilgrimage in the city of David, Jerusalem?
Well, it brings the Bible back to life. From a sewage pipe that burst 15 years ago came these excavations that resulted in the discovery of the pool of Siloam, where all the Jewish pilgrims would come and cleanse themselves before ascending to the temple. And then an entire road, not a relic, not an antiquity, but an entire road intact from that pool ascending to the temple. So people can literally immerse themselves in the environment where the great biblical figures of the time would walk, where Jesus walked. We know that Jesus took this road. We know his visits to the temple are well documented. So you really have the opportunity to immerse yourself in ancient history in this incredible, stunning discovery.
Moving on, with a large hammer in hand, United States Ambassador to Israel David Friedman hammered through the last wall around a rare Jewish archaeological site buried under a Palestinian home in East Jerusalem. But while the dramatic display, which took place on Sunday, may have been a proud moment for Jewish history, it left the Palestinians livid. So what's all the fuss about? After all, this archaeological find in the city of David National Park was a long time coming. Well, researchers have excavated the site for 8 years now, and findings indicate indisputable evidence of ancient Jewish life in the area, something the PA sees as a threat to their origin narrative. For example, at the city of David, researchers found the pilgrimage road, which dates back to some 30 to 31 CE, when Roman governor Pontius Pilate ruled the land. Also, the road extends from the pool of Siloam to the Jewish temple, and it was discovered using fiber optic cables that were used underground, well below the hustle and bustle of the Jerusalem we know today. But the Palestinians couldn't care less about the technological innovations used to find this discovery and its significance. Instead, the PLO issued a statement that United States Middle East envoy Jason Greenblatt and Ambassador David Friedman colluded in a war crime that must be condemned because they took part in the ceremony at all. And the Palestinian Authority's chief negotiator called Friedman an extremist Israeli settler as well. Then left-wing Israeli activists also slammed the ceremony, with left-wing NGO Peace Now calling the road the controversy tunnel. Further, the NGO also organized a protest outside of the ceremony where one activist was detained by authorities. But Israel and the Trump administration are paying no mind to the criticisms, lauding the event as a boon for the Jewish people and their history. And as for Friedman, he said this archaeological find confirms with evidence, with science, and with archaeological studies the centrality of Jerusalem to the Jewish people.